Today's book is Shakespeare is Cervantes, who shows you how to use the Masonic code of Freemasonry to untangle the mystery that is Don Quixote. And also it reveals the true purpose of Cervantes' magnum opus and who are the characters in it. It will knock your socks off, I think. Uh, Shakespeare is Cervantes is written by Miquel Izquierdo, who has an amazing knowledge of the age, the characters, the literature, the meta literature, the theater within the theater, history, etc. He's a true expert. The book in itself, I don't like how it's built. Chapters 1 and 2 are meant to explain a bunch of things people don't know, in order to explain why Don Quixote is a hermetic and a coded work, and it has to forcibly do it in a way which is too reduced in time, and albeit true, is so departed from common knowledge that when you get to chapter 3, where the book really starts, it's just a bit too much. The best way for me to explain this material and why Cervantes and Shakespeare are both the same author, and that both are alter egos or avatars of the real writer, and why this has to be thus, is another way. Okay, and that's in that order I will do it in this video. The book is also a bit of an interim work. It was published in a rush for the 400th anniversary of the death of Shakespeare and Cervantes, the alleged death. This book needs a new version to be published in English, not only with the full complete work that Mr. Izquierdo has as of now, but it needs to be redacted anew. Getting into the core of the book, first we'll dismiss the official characters, supposed to be both Shakespeare and Cervantes. To me and to the author, it is given that both the Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon and the Cervantes of the Miquel de Cervantes birth certificate, which is clearly forged, are false. Those men were only used as covers for the real author. As Napoleon said, history is a set of lies agreed upon, and there was a time, if not always, in which history was not just manufactured, but actually agreed upon between states and their court historians, which are almost all of them. Literature was a matter of prestige, especially at that age, and despite being alter egos or avatars, histories were built around those fictional characters as a matter of state interest. Now, the power of Leviathan is huge, and people actually believe what they have been told, and historians normally follow whatever the official line is, as Don Quixote believed the stories of chivalry books. Thus, Miquel Izquierdo spends a considerable amount of time to tear down the official story of both Shakespeare and Cervantes. So first, we'll see why the characters currently thought to be both Shakespeare and Cervantes were not the authors. Let's go quickly over the points. The official Shakespeare, the Stratford-upon-Avon one, did not have access to continental culture and languages, which clearly Shakespeare, the author, had. Most of the works of Shakespeare have some reference to Italy, not only generally, but actually of specific places, which clearly show the author had been there. The official Shakespeare, the real man, was poor and lacked world exposure to be the writer. poor, at least in origin. He prospered later, being the cobbler and working with the real author, according to Izquierdo. The official Shakespeare lacked knowledge in law and how the aristocracy worked, which clearly the Bard knew. The most notable reasons, though, are to do with what he writes. For instance, Shakespeare borrows the Cardenii character from Cervantes' Cardenio. The fact that many styles of writing and themes and characters of Shakespeare come from Cervantes shows it. The first reference of the Shakespeare from Stratford is as a knight. William of Stratford would not be knighted until later, maybe to make it coincide. Also, Shakespeare, the author, was most likely Catholic. I don't think that the Shakespeare of Stratford would have been knighted if a known Catholic. Shakespeare talks about a picture in the court of Philip II of Spain, which of course the William of Stratford could have never seen. Also, Shakespeare himself tells us that he is not the real author by the use of a hyphen in his name. Okay, he's telling us that he's a pseudonymous by the common convention at the time. Now, the English-speaking world has a more liberal tradition, and there's open debate and plenty of significant and important figures that openly discuss alternative views of who Shakespeare is, whether it is a group of people, a different person that was established, etc. There have been plenty of books pondering on it. This is a bit of an honor for the English-speaking world because you can clearly challenge if you see that the Shakespeare, the author, wasn't the Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon, you can seek for the truth, etc. This will not happen in the Spanish-speaking world. Let's go now and see the reasons why Cervantes, the author, could not be the Cervantes that is commonly thought as of being. His biography is pretty much made up. The birth certificate is forged and registered in a church built after his birth. Allegedly, his burial left no trace, which is strange for a celebrity. His history has clearly been erased. He spends twice the amount of the Castilian Cervantes' wife inheritance in a couple of volumes, which is very odd. Cervantes, the author, is someone of an entirely different station than the one that they want him to be. He's at the service of the crown and actually says that he wants to spend the rest of his days at the service of the crown as his ancestors, which clearly the poor Castilian Cervantes didn't. He has an illiterate daughter, and his father is a village doctor that had only 3 books. Again, unthinkable. There's no writer of the time that with illiterate children, if he could help it. Having said so, the official historiographical Cervantes has actually much more to do with the real author that's behind both Cervantes and Shakespeare. Some biography coincides. Shakespeare is a second avatar that was done later, and when the original author was hiding in England. So there's much more coincidence between the original author and Cervantes than with the original author and Shakespeare. Let's do a break here to understand the Masonic code and how to use it, because we're dealing with a Masonic author. Clearly, there are works of both Shakespeare and Cervantes which are clearly Masonic. As an example, the Masonic phrase, "it is not what you are that's important, but what you're willing to be," is first expressed in Don Quixote, as it is, "tell me with who you go, and I'll tell you who you are," etc. Freemasons refer to Shakespeare as Brother Shakespeare. I will not go on because this entire works of based on this relationship of both Shakespeare and Cervantes to Freemasonry. Freemasons use both liberally. Okay, this is the table Freemasons were using on the 16th century. As says below, Sir Francis Bacon was the imperator of the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians being just a branch of the order within Masonry. Okay, you have for each letter a symbol and a key number, and we don't know what this second key number was used for. The examples that Mr. Izquierdo has found are based on the simple code. As you can see in the right hand side, you have several examples. Both Shakespeare, Cervantes, and Sir Francis Bacon wrote using this code so that they could exchange information privately among themselves in the open, while the same text would be dull to those not enlightened, to those not illuminated with the knowledge of how to decode it. They would use this code when creating characters as a confirmation that the character that you think might be that person in the story because of the context, it is indeed that person. Okay, so for instance, there's correspondence between John Marston and Joseph Hall talking about Sir Francis Bacon, and they refer in the text to him as Labeo. So by reading the text, you would suspect that Labeo is Sir Francis Bacon, and then you would apply the code, see that the numbers coincide, and then that would be the confirmation. Okay, because it was indeed mathematically very improbable that it would coincide by chance. Okay, you can see several examples here. So Fra Rosicruce adds up to 157. Bacon to 33, Francis Bacon to 100, Shakespeare to 103. But this very important thing is that you should not look only for the simple way to make things coincide, but coincidence might be either graphical or phonetic. Also, you have to find the exception sometimes. The odd ones are the ones that are the mistakes are put there so that you fixate on it and use that one for your confirmation. Okay, so phonetically you could see that Shakespeare could be 102, or graphically, if you catch it, especially in the earlier writings, um, uh, or on official documents when he asked for a coat of arms. Okay. Also, in his will, you can see an intentional mistake 3 times, written Shakespeare, which tells you to look to look into it, that to use that using the Masonic code. So this is the way to use the Masonic code to do confirmation of characters. Let's see first why Shakespeare is Cervantes. Both fake Shakespeare and Cervantes, and by fake I mean the characters that existed in real life but were not actually the authors. So both of them are oddly coming from poor backgrounds. That happens when a character in history is manufactured to cover someone else's normally. Both fakes didn't climb in life the profits of their work and retired early and poor in the case of the Castilian Cervantes. Both made irony through their characters of who the true author of their works was. Both lived in confronted monarchies, but it is believed that Shakespeare read the first half of Don Quixote and borrowed some of his characters. Both widened the frontiers of their respective literatures. Both were fruitful and wrote in a synchronized manner. And there's a way in which Miquel Izquierdo shows you the images in which, the table of the years and the works of both authors and how they coincide, the gaps coincide. Okay, they are the two most important figures of the history of literature. Each is considered the best writer in their language. Both fakes belong to large families. William of Stratford didn't know Greek or Latin, neither had he university studies. The Castilian Cervantes only did a few months of Latin. Both entertained weird theories like they were not the authors of the works attributed to them. They also coincide in the distortion of reality that some of their characters suffer, or the particular humor of some of their secondary characters, such as Falstaff and Sancho Panza. The most iconic and universal character, Hamlet and Don Quixote, are mad. They both had works attributed to them. Each create in their language a full set of new expressions and words that will become canon in their respective languages. Both explain the human spirit and miseries of their respective countries. Both hide beneath their characters. Cervantes is called the Swan of Turia, which is a river in Valencia, and Shakespeare is called the Swan of Avon. Both allegedly died the 23rd of April 1616, despite in different calendars. I think this is clearly arranged for posterity, as it's St. George's Day. Also, it is the day of the death of Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, which is key to the story, and we will see later. And 3 out of 3 is just too much to believe in chance or in coincidence. Both were subjects to two opposite monarchies with totally different circles, so that a single person could pose in both courts atmospheres without being recognized. And actually, the real author behind Shakespeare was hiding in England and didn't sign his work until Philip II of Spain died. Clearly, he was hiding from Philip II. There's also a lot of expressions, pages 111 to 114, particular phrases from the works of Cervantes that appear in the work of Shakespeare. Probably Shakespeare and Sir Francis Bacon, especially Bacon, created the promise between 1593 and 1594 during the epidemic. There is a coincidence also in the juridic knowledge between Cervantes and Shakespeare. There's a lot of essays by juridic experts reflecting this. Cervantes worked as a secretary of the Duke of Alba, which required juridic knowledge. Shakespeare worked as a notary, which at the time served as jurists as well for Sir Francis Bacon, according to Izquierdo, and based also on the graphologist work by graphologist Charles Hamilton. Also, the characters of both Shakespeare and Cervantes use expressions and procedures that reflect that. Also, both authors and the hidden author behind them express contempt for jurists as well. Okay, he wasn't very kind on his own kind. There's also a lot of coincidences at a hermetic level between them. The last works of Cervantes, Persiles y Segismunda, and Shakespeare's The Tempest are Masonic works. Both show having Rosicrucian knowledge, and Shakespeare is probably one of the original Illuminati. Now the internet has obscured this term with all sort of nonsense, but it's just a Masonic term for the best minds. Okay, the most enlightened. The Illuminati are the ones that are most enlightened. Shakespeare is also a Masonic anagram, shaking the spear, shaking the phallus. Okay, sign of power or disdain. I'm not initiated in Freemasonry, but prima facie, I buy the ideas plausible. First little taste of Masonic coincidence, we can see that Shakespeare coincide phonetically with Cervantes, and also graphically in those places where there's an intentional mistake, which makes that spelling highlight. Let's see who's the real author behind them both. My dear lords, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the author behind both Shakespeare and Cervantes, according to Miquel Izquierdo, is this one, Miquel Sirven, with his Masonic sign with the hand, and the Masonic encryption corroborates it. The Masonic encryption tells us that this is Miquel Sirven. As you probably know, this is the painting El Caballero de la Mano en el Pecho. Now, being a Masonic painting, we would seek confirmation, but we don't find it initially. It doesn't match either Miguel de Cervantes, okay, nor does it match Miquel Sirven for that matter. But it does coincide nevertheless. What happens when you say in Catalan al cavaller de la mà al pit? 400 years hidden in plain sight. When Miquel Izquierdo found that, he had to pause for 15 minutes, and I believe he tells the truth. Imagine finding that 400 years after. So, again, here is our man. Here we have Cervantes. Here we have Shakespeare, Miquel Servent with his Masonic hand sign, which, of course, match both phonetically and graphically. Now, physically, you might be surprised to see Shakespeare like that, because you are used to see Shakespeare looking different. But remember, this Shakespeare is just a convention. The only record we have of Shakespeare and how he looked over time, his memory looked over time, is not very reliable. This is the tomb of Stratford-upon-Avon and the different evolutions over time. If we take the earlier of the pictures, we can do a more feasible comparison. We have no idea how the English Shakespeare from Stratford looked, or how the Castilian Cervantes looked like, for that matter. Okay, we just don't know. Now, the author thinks he knows the real Cervantes and his biography. The author starts with literary reasons. Okay, first of all, Cervantes is a very weird Castilian. All the time he's praising the Catalans, now as then enemies. He's praising the Catalan written literature. His works have plenty of words and phrases that are just translated from Catalan, but they just end up in the Spanish corpus because of the written words of the 16th century and weren't actually spoken at the time, nor before or later for that matter. There are phrases that can only be a translation from Catalan, especially at the first part of Don Quixote. There's also tangential evidence, like the fact that the distances between cities mentioned in Don Quixote in Castile do not make sense, do not correspond to the real distances in Castile. But when Don Quixote suddenly enters Catalonia, the city, the distances between the cities match, they're real. Not only the first edition of Don Quixote is missing, the one published in Barcelona, but later in subsequent printings they removed any reference to the Catalan-speaking world. For instance, we have an earlier edition of Don Quixote dedicated to the Count of Barcelona. Okay, and in later editions that would have been removed. Okay, as removed has been the reference to the three different kingdoms of Aragon, Castile, and Portugal as different differentiated entities. Izquierdo is not the first to suspect Cervantes is behind Cervantes. Why Cervantes or Cervantes? This could be because Catalan wasn't normalized until very late, or depending from where you came. Okay, it would sound different if you spoke Catalan from Catalonia or from Valencia. Also, Izquierdo thinks that Cervantes is the Catalan alter ego of Servent. Okay, both plausible. So in that case, Cervantes, and Shakespeare both would be alter egos of Cervantes. The real person behind Cervantes is not from Castilian background, is from Catalan background. Now, the author thinks he has found the actual family and person that's behind Cervantes. The fact that there are several other Sirvent or Servent that got their name translated into Castilian as Cervantes makes the search much easier, as you can go ahead and just look among the Sirvents that were serving in the several kingdoms of the Crown of Aragon, as they were an ancient family of crown servants. Okay. The author gets a list from an article which lists the similitudes between Miguel de Cervantes and the Servant lineage, and it goes as follows. Cervantes says his ancestors have worked at the court and Cervantes' ancestors have worked at the court. Cervantes is believed to belong to a lineage of writers, and the Cervantes have been notaries, chancellors, writers. Cervantes calls himself the Swan of the Turia, and the Cervantes live in Chichona and Valencia. Cervantes asks for the position of treasurer of several kingdoms in the Indies and acts as a tax collector, and the Cervantes are treasurers in several royal chancelleries, and one of them is a tax collector. There are several references that make us suspect that he's from a Catalan background, as the Cervantes are. Cervantes writes that his family came from a place in the mountains. The Cervantes family comes from Puigcerdà originally, which is a city surrounded by mountains in La Cerdanya. Cervantes admits at some point that it's three brothers. The family of the Cervantes of Chichona are indeed three famous brothers. One branch of those go to Castile and are translated, are called Cervantes, and the second one are also called Cervantes with the arms of a deer. The coat of arms of Cervantes is a deer, as is the one of Cervantes. Miguel de Cervantes battles in Flanders with a brother of his. The three Cervantes brothers fight in Flanders. Cervantes fights in the wars in Italy and North Africa, as indeed do the real Cervantes. Cervantes becomes famous at the service of Philip II, as indeed do the three Cervantes brothers. Cervantes has a twisted arm from a military wound, and the Cervantes brothers became wounded by an explosion. Cervantes is in Naples and Sicily, where he has friends. The Cervantes are chancellors at the court of Alfonso V of Aragon in Naples. Cervantes has a house in Barcelona, in Columbus's Promenade, and the Cervantes also have a house in Barcelona. Cervantes praises the Catalan freedom fighter Perot Rocaguinarda. The Catalan jurist opposed the uniformation of the Spanish crown. Cervantes revolutionizes the literary prose full of Catalan traces and chancellery mannerisms. Bartomeu Cervant, an ancestor of the Cervants of the time, is the one that revolutionized the chancellery prose at the end of the 14th century in the Kingdom of Valencia. Cervantes knows and uses the language of traders. The Cervantes are traders. Cervantes knows perfectly well the uses and language of navigation. The Cervantes are sailors and consuls. Cervantes is an admirer and plagiarist of Joan Luis Vives, and Rafael Vives publishes Don Quixote in Barcelona in a single volume. And indeed, the Vives and the Cervantes family are relatives. Also, alluding to his character, Cervantes defended the vernacular languages, which at the time the crown was trying to eradicate in favor of Castilian, as it is the Spanish state right now trying to do. Cervantes is surrounded by Catalan friends, and he also embarks in Barcelona to go to the Battle of Lepanto with the company of Miquel de Montcada, who is a Valencian, so all his connections are on the Catalan-speaking world. He says that the Catalan nation is the best nation in the world, and that Valencia is the most beautiful city in Europe. So he was clearly biased towards, home. He says that the Valencian Catalan language is the most sweet and agreeable language to which only the Portuguese can compare. And I think that's very funny because I think that a lot of Catalan people would have the same exact opinion right now, centuries later. The fact that he denounces book burning is clearly an anti-Counter-Reformation and anti-Castilian, pro-Enlightenment writer. Would say Cervantes is no Quevedo, okay, at all. He also attracts the attention of Catalans mainly, in terms of studying Cervantes. The best specialists of Cervantes normally have been traditionally Catalan scholars. There's something in Cervantes that draws the attention of Catalans to this day. And I'll add one of my own that Miquel Izquierdo doesn't say. That's me. Also, when the Valencians tell someone to go fuck themselves, they say "Besa la mà," so it's like go masturbate yourself. So go to shake your spear, one might say. There's plenty of reasons to locate Cervantes in Denia, in the Catalan kingdom of Valencia, because there is where Cervantes goes after being released from Algiers, because he disembarks in Denia, because the coat of arms he designs for his English cover, the Shakespeare of Stratford, is very similar to the Sandoval, the Marquis of Denia, and because Bernardo de Sandoval, royal inquisitor, is his protector. Because in the Viaje al Parnaso, which is a non-official autobiography of Cervantes, he says he arrived to the motherland when he saw the coast of Denia. Because in the Persiles, they arrive at the kingdom of Valencia, because Cervantes says Quixote comes from Quixada, which is a specific way to say Queixada in these specific shires of Denia, in reference to the jaws of the Habsburg. So Don Quixote, it means it's come from Quixada or Queixada, which is that which, of course, the Habsburg had a famous prominent jaw. Okay. There's a whole section I'm not including in the video about the why he is specifically from Denia, Valencia, and the whole kingdom of Valencia. So Miquel Izquierdo is not only founding that Cervantes and Shakespeare are the same person, and that Cervantes and Sirvent is the same person, but actually he's looking already for the particular family and person and the surroundings of the real author. We'll see later who the characters in Cervantes and in Shakespeare's books are. Before, let's talk about the first edition of Don Quixote in English. José Luis Borges, who was bilingual, read first the English Don Quixote and then the Spanish one. After doing so, he expressed that the Spanish one seemed to him like a bad translation. This is because neither book is the original. Both are translations, and the English one is the best. The English translation was done in 1612 by Thomas Shelton, which is more surely a cover. All Thomas Shelton does in history is sign his translation and nothing evermore. Probably didn't exist. It's a false name. And we have our confirmation when we know that Shelton is encrypted for the publisher of Cervantes in Flanders, Velpeves. The translator of Don Quixote in Flanders did the English translation signing as Thomas Shelton. When Cervantes goes to England, he's fleeing persecution from the authoritarian and Castilian supremacist Philip II of Castile, who ruled Spain. And there's evidence of that in the diary of James I of England. There, in England, he creates a second avatar, Shakespeare, and surely he creates a covert translator as well. By the by, the dedication where you find the Velpivus is totally written by Cervantes according to Miquel Izquierdo. Now, for people like me, the Masonic encryption, because of its mathematical improbability, calls attention, and is the one that it's like the proof for people like myself. But for people like Miquel Izquierdo, the expert in the text itself is the one that tells what. So he looks at the writing and how it is written, and he can tell you, oh, this is Cervantes reading it by looking at how it is actually the mannerisms and etc. Shelton says that he translated the book in 40 days, which is of course impossible. The book is 500 pages long, and 40 days by coincidence is a time of Jesus' penance. Shelton says the book was translated 5 or 6 years before 1611, denouncing that the original was a different one than the first one, the first Madrid edition of 1605. Let's remember there was an original edition erased from history. We haven't found a single copy of it that we know of by tangential references, and it is the first unfound edition of Barcelona, which was probably written in Catalan. There is a scene which appears in the first English edition of Don Quixote and do not appear in the first Castilian edition, which means that the English translation was done from a book other than the first Castilian known edition. It's not difficult to see. It had to come from the first and lost Catalan edition, and that's why the English edition is better. Francis Carr, the author of Who Wrote Don Quixote, says that translation into English was done before it was first published in Spanish. So he already saw the inconsistencies, as many others have over time. Other authors have said that probably the English version is the most trustworthy. For instance, there are obscure and complicated references to the order of Calatrava in the English translation, which are lost in the Spanish one. That explains why, in many of the first English translations, Sancho Panza is called Pancha or Pancha, as it would sound in Catalan. Explains as well why Don Quixote is called Don Quixote or Quixote, as it would sound in Catalan. Notice as well how Thomas Shelton signs his dedication of the Don Quixote translation to Lord Walden. Instead of writing the classical servant, he writes servitor, which is clearly an intentional mistake, because it's not he's not defining his position, your servant, but it's his name, your servitor, sirven. As an example of the good translation in English is that, for instance, sort in Catalan is correctly translated as death in the English Don Quixote. So we know that in the original book it was called sword, and it was correctly translated as death in English. But in the Spanish translation, there's a mistake, and it's sword is translated as zurdo, left-handed, which makes the text nonsensical in the Spanish version of Don Quixote. The English translation is correctly translated, the Spanish one not. And there's many evidences. This video cannot explain them all. There's also a dedication to a lord when the guy already was a count. There's evidences in the text, like parts of the story that appear later, which are not in the English translation, which means that they were done in a posterior edition, etc. Or, for instance, there's a stylistic coincidence in the theater within the theater, in which the play never ends as something interrupts it. This is the kind of things that experts such as Mr. Izquierdo see. Okay, the stylistic innovation by Cervantes, and therefore by Cervantes and by Shakespeare, that happen, and it's always the same. There's a play within the play, and this play that it's played within the play never ends because something interrupts the play. Now, the Rosetta Stone of the triangle Cervantes-Shakespeare is the Promus, a kind of compilation of quotes, aphorisms, etc., which is most likely written at two hands between Shakespeare, Cervantes, and Sir Francis Bacon, especially Bacon at the end, and was created to give the English language a more solid base, and was very well welcomed by Queen Elizabeth. At the time, Cervantes was working with Sir Francis Bacon. It also coincides with the scribe of Bacon, which at the time it was also a position akin to a notary. Okay. There's also things like in the Promus you see the word albada, as in Catalan, for the dawn, okay, which then appears in the works of Shakespeare, but that nevertheless has never before been used in English, and it's actually not very common word. Who are the characters in Don Quixote, and what does Cervantes or Cervantes mean when was writing Don Quixote? The simple reading of Don Quixote is not hard to figure out. It's about a Castilian nobleman who read so many lies in chivalry books, thus propaganda, that does not distinguish truth from fiction, and only eventually recovers reason in the beach of Barcelona, the Catalan capital, when defeated by the Knight of the White Moon. And there's plenty of Don Quixotes then, as of now. Don Quixote is a symbolic, numerologic, and Masonic work about encoded messages, and Mr. Izquierdo gives us several examples in the book. So first we have our Don Quixote, our Sancho Panza, and a third character, Cide Hamete Berengeli, okay, which is a mockery of an Arab name, who Cervantes says is the real author of Don Quixote. Okay, in the story, Cervantes says that he has found some papers written by this Moor, and he is merely translating them. Okay, actually, it says it 33 times, which is an obvious Masonic number. So we have our Berengeli, who writes lies, the stupid and credulous Don Quixote that believes those lies, and then you have Sancho Panza, who sees through the lies despite his humble station. And let's see who they are really. Now, Sancho Panza, well, Sancho Panza, taking as it sounds in Catalan, in the first English translation, always take the English translation for is the best approximation to the original lost one. If you do so, you can see that Sancho Panza is Cervantes itself. Okay, so he's telling you, I am Sancho Panza. I am the one that sees through the lies, and I'm going to expose those lies to you. Berengeli. Who is Berengeli? Berengeli is the Habsburg, Philip II of Spain. Okay, the one that writes the lies, the king that created those lies, the king that made matter of state rewriting history. That is, hiring and having on the payroll historians that manufactured a whole false history to be what we now know as the history of Spain. Bear in mind that the history of Columbus and the discovery of the New World, for instance, was forbidden for over a century before being released to the public, properly massaged. So it was fully manipulated before releasing. Also, on a less politically correct note, Sidi Hamete Berengeli is obviously Arab, and the Catalans used to insult Castilians by calling them Arabs, as at the time, not now. That was done during centuries. Okay, in the same way that the Castilians used to insult the Catalans by calling them Genoese. Don Quixote. Who is Don Quixote? Don Quixote is Inca Garcilaso de la Vega. And who is Inca Garcilaso de la Vega? Now, you may not know this character, but it was very known at the time. Inca Garcilaso de la Vega is Boob. Okay, he was a Criollo historian who very naively believed the official line. He wrote, for instance, an allegory of cultures coexisting and merging one with another, regarding the Spanish and Indians in the New World, when in reality it was brutal massacre. So Don Quixote is this ridiculous character which Miquel Izquierdo Peràn explains quite deeply in the book, but that basically represents all the idiots that read books and believe them just because they're an old dusty book, without realizing that it was all false and manufactured state propaganda by Philip II, Habsburg of Spain. So we got our Habsburg Berengeli that creates lies, Don Quixote, who is Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, and basically also all historians that just believe the state propaganda history of Philip II, and Sancho Panza, Cervantes, Sirven, that's telling you that he sees through those lies. Also, Berengeli is referred in Don Quixote as Berenjena in the book. Okay, so is also de la Vega. Okay, so Inca Garcilaso de la Vega and his court of parrot historians to this day repeat what's already been written. So they are not only Don Quixote, the one that believes the lies and repeats them, but they are also the Berenjena. So those that are also authors because they propagate those lies. Okay, a Berenjena is a second-rate Berengeli. Okay, second-rate Habsburg. They also write the lies they've read. Well, this Berenjena guy in Don Quixote qualifies at the end of the book Don Quixote as Prudentissimo, which is a known nickname of the time for Philip II. Also, Dulcinea, the love interest of Don Quixote, is Christ in Catalan. Okay. Uh, uh, to be honest, I didn't think from now on you can study Cervantes or Shakespeare without knowing Catalan. Okay. Um, so Don Quixote, following Christ, believes the lies of Berengeli and repeats them. So he's denouncing faith as a way to obscure things rather than illuminate. And then there's also the children of Cervantes in fictional characters. For instance, Rinconete is himself. Pancha, as we have seen in Don Quixote, is Cervantes as well, Sirven. And the Persiles is also Sirven. Okay, this technique of having the author play in the book through a character was taken from Tirando Blanc, okay, which is the book that Don Quixote saves from the fire, from the book burning fire. It's basically a classic chivalry book of the Catalan literature by Joanot Martorell. Now, regarding Shakespeare's characters, there's much less material. First and foremost, Macbeth, released in public in 1605, but not published until 1623, 7 years after the death of William of Stratford. Macbeth is the story of a ruthless murderer of whom everybody is scared of. Pursuer of freethinkers, Freemasons, and any progressive element. By now you should already suspect who Macbeth is. Okay, Philip II of Spain. And indeed, Macbeth is Philip. And as Macbeth was Thane of Glamis, and later of a smaller island called Cawdor, so Philip II was first King of England, as per his marriage with Mary I, and later King of Sicily. So there's a whole rereading of Shakespeare's works based on these clues that Shakespeare historians need to do. By denouncing the cruelty and tyranny of Philip II and his rewriting of history, Sirven Cervantes Shakespeare had a special beef with Philip II, and he coded his revenge in the most universal works of literature. Let's remember, for instance, that the Justice of Aragon, who was a political family of servant, was killed by direct order of Philip II, just as an example of why he would hate him, okay, apart from being a politically and nationally an antagonist of what was at the time his master. Now, there are other coincidences that Miquel Izquierdo has, like, for instance, Old Castle means Lord Cobham, or Aldona Lorenco means Jesus de Galilea. Okay, so the mathematical probability of those coincidences make the whole thing pretty much undeniable, especially those that go three-way. Okay, and thus Sir Ben triumphs across time and through his cover authors, Cervantes and Shakespeare. There was upon a time one of the most rich literatures in Europe, which was the medieval Catalan literature, and it suddenly collapsed. And in his replacement, the Castilian Siglo de Oro was born with plenty of authors, sometimes the royal official, the censor, and plenty of rich stories written in a new Castilian language that nobody really spoke in real life, full of what's called catalanadas, which are the errors a native Catalan speaker does when speaking Castilian, or maybe an unskilled translator might do in a rush. It is, I believe, and so does the author, a fact that most of the 16th century Spanish literature is a translation from the original Catalan works into Castilian, and then the destruction of the original Catalan version. Sometimes we have found these original Catalan versions. And although all that wasn't an obsessive persecution of anything Catalan that perseveres until these very days. Not only this atmosphere of persecution against the Catalan language and nation has lasted centuries, but it has been especially hard during the recurring dictatorships that Spain has had, and especially under Philip II, who also did the groundwork to rewrite history. It is, in my opinion, that most of Spanish history is a fabrication. Okay. In this context, Miquel Cervantes, as Freemasons, found subterfuge and concealment to communicate to each other and to leave for posterity their denunciations of the tyranny under which they lived. And Cervantes found in England and in English, and with the friends there in Sir Francis's Bacon circle, the refuge he could not find in his native Spain. The whole works of Cervantes and Shakespeare need to be revisited through the Cervantes and Catalan lens. That might be a threat for historians who, as Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, defend whatever they have read, or it can be, for the best of them, for the illuminated ones, a key to find countless new pearls of knowledge left behind by our ancestors in a quest for knowledge as to what it really happened. Another obstacle for the Inca Garcilaso de la Vegas of this world might be the Pandora's box that this might open as the rabbit hole goes way deeper. And likewise, the best of them will be willing, happy, and dying to explore where that rabbit hole might lead. The only thing that's left for me to do is to wish this gets done, and perhaps an original first edition of Don Quixote, the one written in Catalan and published in Barcelona, gets found someday, and we can read the genius from first hand.